Adventure travel is not just adventure travel. I believe that adventure travel is a form of social currency.
Paying almost $100,000 to spend a week in the cold.
More people who are not ready to climb Everest.
We're going 2,000 miles an hour!
In this video, I would like to discuss the nature of extreme adventure travel, the kinds of trips that are available to the ultra-rich that you've probably never heard about. I also want to discuss whether trips like this should be regulated or whether they should be allowed, especially looking at adventure travel in the context of the recent Titan submersible tragedy. I think this is a really good opportunity to take a look at some of the really expensive adventures that people embark on, including space travel, underwater travel, climbing Everest, climbing the tallest mountain in Antarctica, and various other types of trips. Now, I have first-hand experience of some of these experiences as a travel vlogger. In 2022, I climbed the tallest peak in Antarctica, which is a very expensive trip. But first, let's talk about the idea of adventure travel being social currency. I think that since we started sharing our lives, our photos, our videos on social media platforms, including Instagram, there's been an influx of people wanting to do more and more adventurous things. I think the world has been shrinking in a way. It has been becoming more accessible. It's so much easier to get to really remote places these days than it was even 20 or 30 years ago. And then there's all the movies, you know, the blockbuster movies like Wild or Into the Wild. The movies that basically show us that going out on amazing adventures is something that we should and could aspire towards. I do think that fast cars and massive mansions and designer handbags still do function as a symbol of wealth in our society, but what better way to show that you have an amazing life than to go to a place that none of your family or friends have ever been to? What better way to show that you live adventurously and to the fullest than by going on a really wild adventure that challenges you and where you re-emerge as a hero. But right now, I want to tell you a little bit about the hidden world of ultra luxury VVIP travel. Yes, it's actually called that. And in fact, there's a word for it, and it is Luxpeditions. A Luxpedition is for those who want their Bear Grylls experience during the daytime, but at night want to blast away the dust, dirt, and sweat with a power shower and slip beneath crisp, clean sheets. The idea is basically to provide a kind of anti-luxury luxury. So you get the whole adventurous experience of being out there in a really remote place and challenging yourself, but without really going the whole way. Here's a couple of examples of Luxpeditions that I personally have come across. There's a company called White Desert, which operates luxury private camps in Antarctica. For a neat $100,000 per person, you get flown on a private jet to one of their camps in Antarctica. You get to stay in a beautiful tent that has heated flooring, and of course there's a private chef who will cook for you every day and every night. There's optional add-ons that you can purchase as well, such as, you know, hanging out with the penguins, or for a little bit of a hefty sum of money, you get to climb a virgin peak. Yep, that's a virgin peak that most likely nobody has ever climbed before. Another example of a company that caters to the ultra-rich and organizes trips just for them is Cookson Adventures. These guys don't actually publish prices on their website, presumably because all the experiences they create and design are just so bespoke. But you can get an idea if you just go to the contact form. For one, you can select the world first option. Presumably this means they'll help you design an experience that nobody in written history has ever done before. And then there's the price selector. The minimum budget they work with is about £150,000, about $200,000. But if you slide the price gauge all the way to the other side, you end up at a budget of £1 million plus. Spending $100,000 per person on a trip to Antarctica, or $1 million plus on some other crazy, ultra-remote, ultra-secluded private trip may seem ludicrous to us. I mean, keep in mind that maybe my perception of money is going to be very different to how a billionaire or a millionaire views money. You know, for me, that would be a terrible financial blow. So I can definitely see why someone would book a holiday like that. I mean, I think on a very basic level, the motivations of, you know, taking a trip to the ends of the earth that is very expensive versus taking a backpacking trip into the woods for a few days, the motivations are kind of similar for a backpacker and a billionaire, if I can draw that comparison. Because I think that in both cases, what we're looking for is, you know, to feel adventurous, to push our limits, to go to places that few of the people that we know have been to, and to just live a very special new kind of experience in close proximity to nature. This is where we get to the kind of next type of ultra expensive trips that people take. And these are the ultra expensive expeditions. And a lot of these expeditions are mountaineering expeditions. So I want to talk about Everest, and I want to talk about Mount Vinson in Antarctica, because I have done the latter. So I feel like I can give you a bit of a perspective into what it's actually like. So the cheapest Everest expeditions that I could find will set you back at least $40,000. But more commonly, you would be looking at spending about $70,000 and more. And that is, you know, without the gear, without previous training, without actually getting to Nepal in the first place. You might wonder, why are these expeditions so expensive? Well, number one, there's a permit system in Nepal, so permits need to be paid. Sherpas need to be hired, guides need to be hired and paid as well. So there's a lot of moving parts that kind of go into it, even before you start climbing. And then, you know, once you're on the climb, of course, there's the whole infrastructure of Everest Base Camp, there's tents, there's equipment, there's food. In reality, there is probably no like upper end to how much an Everest expedition could cost. Because in addition to, let's say, the $70,000 as a kind of base payment, there's a company called Seven Summits that offers add-ons. So in addition to climbing Everest with 8848, the residence, you get a private tent all to yourself, and here are some of the amenities. A private ensuite with hot shower, a private restroom, personal stove heater, a onesie PJ, a chest of drawers, personal humidifier, a morning beverage service, and a shoe rack. I don't know why you need a shoe rack on Everest, but fair enough. And then you can pay a neat $8,000 extra to get helicoptered out of base camp to Kathmandu. I mean, I laugh, but actually I kind of get it. Imagine that you're a millionaire, entrepreneur, businessman who also wants to climb Everest, but you can't afford to take 2 entire months off of work. That happens to a lot of people. So then paying $30,000 for this upgrade where you get to work from your own tent, you know, have internet, and then be able to kind of get off the mountain as soon as you're done with your climb, that makes sense in some context and to some people. There is definitely a lot of criticism of, you know, people who kind of like just pay their way into it and then expect the Sherpas to do the brunt of the work. Now, keep in mind that, you know, the vast majority of the climbers there are very fit and are very well prepared, and they do carry their own backpacks and their own oxygen bottles and things like that. I don't think the situation is quite as dire as some media outlets would have you believe. I do believe that there should be some checks in place preventing just any person with money to be able to access the mountain just because they can pay for it. You know, there's a couple of companies that I've come across personally that will take people up the mountain, even if those people have very little to no climbing experience. This is how we get to Antarctica. And Antarctica is pretty special to me because in 2022, I went on a climbing expedition there to reach the summit of the tallest mountain in Antarctica, Mount Vinson. This expedition is pretty pricey. I paid about $40,000 to go. It was a very serious consideration for me because, you know, spending $40,000 on this one trip felt almost wrong. Like, you know, I was giving away the bulk of all of my money, which I could have put into potentially, you know, a down payment for an apartment or something like that. But, you know, keep in mind, again, I'm not a millionaire. This was a big chunk of my entire life budget. I decided to spend it on that trip because I thought that, I just love the idea of going on this amazing adventure and doing something so wild and so huge that I'll never forget. That was just my priority at the time, I knew that I'd rather spend that money on that adventure rather than something that perhaps would seem more reasonable to most people. That's the choice I made. And I remember the moment that I was making the wire transfer and my stomach was just sinking and I was thinking, oh my God, am I making the worst mistake of my life? It's just so expensive. And that kind of feeling stayed with me for a little while until I got to Antarctica. And then kind of everything became very, very clear. I had no regrets, and I still have no regrets, even though, again, it still pains me to think about how much it was. I think it was one of the best things I've ever done and will definitely never ever forget it for the rest of my life. So let me tell you a little bit about Antarctica, the kinds of people that go on trips like that and what's actually involved. So as opposed to Everest, when you go to Antarctica, there's none of the luxuries. You're staying in tents, you're eating dehydrated food. That's pretty much it. The way that you get to Antarctica is also not on a private jet or anything like that. They charter a big 747, which brings everybody into Antarctica, all the people that are doing various expeditions. So they kind of land on a big airstrip and then you get transferred to this camp that is managed by a private company. But it's a very basic camp, very rudimentary, but they have nice food and they have, you kind of stay in tents as well, but you can rent a fat bike and you can fat bike around the camp, which is kind of cool. And then you take a small little plane, I don't know if they're Cessnas or something, but they're, very small little kind of Alaska style planes, like bush planes. And then you get transferred to Vincent Base Camp. And from there you put on all your gear and you pull your sled with all of your gear behind you and you start climbing up to the mountain. It's not luxurious at all. You don't get really any special treatment. There are no Sherpas helping you to the top. In fact, there are no Sherpas there at all unless they're just helping out with an expedition as a guide. But there is none of that kind of culture that you see on Everest, that you hear about on Everest. So it's pretty basic. So where does all that money go? Well, it goes into, chartering that 747. It goes into sustaining that base camp. And of course, everybody who works there needs to be paid. The people managing the base camp who spend 3 months out of the year working in Antarctica with no internet, the mountain guides, the pilots. I would estimate that about 80% of the money I spent goes to covering the actual logistical costs of the trip. And interestingly enough, going into this expedition, I wasn't really sure what to expect in terms of who I would meet there. Most of the people that were in my team and that were on some of the other teams that I saw were high net individuals who, either had their own businesses or, just had held very high positions at various corporations. And they were all very fit people who, some of them climbed Everest, some of them had climbed all kinds of other technical mountains all around the world. So it was a really amazing mixed bag of individuals, all of whom were just united by this dream to go and do amazing adventures and amazing things and go and see some of the most remote places on planet Earth. I definitely didn't have a sense that anybody was there by accident. I think everybody just loved being there and really wanted to be there. So why spend so much money on doing really wild and crazy adventures, really extreme things where you know that there's a high chance that you could have an accident, perish without a trace, or just, die? But I really do believe that whether you're a backpacker or a billionaire, whenever you go and do something that is really outside of your comfort zone, maybe something that you've dreamt about for a really long time, maybe something that you've trained for a really long time, I think you're tapping into some kind of ancestral, visceral need that we have as humans for adventure. We have become so detached from, the outdoors that these kinds of grand adventures, I really think, serve as some kinds of, rites of passage that we create for ourselves to, grow, to evolve as human beings, to prove to ourselves and to our tribe that we are strong, that we are worthy, that we can survive. But what happens if your desire for adventure puts your own life at risk or, endangers the lives of others? Should we be allowed to take these kinds of risks? Well, I think the short answer for me is it really depends. It really depends on the context. It really depends on the level of responsibility that you bear for yourself and for others. I do believe there should be more checks in place to ensure that, we are not putting other people's lives in danger. So, is it right? Is it wrong? Is it good? Is it bad? Is it ethical or not? This type of travel, I think, raises a lot of eyebrows. It's something that's very controversial just because of the stakes involved and because of the price tags involved. Are those really things that we need to concern ourselves with and, kind of project our own judgments as to whether they're right or wrong? Honestly, I don't think so. I don't think they're a big enough deal. I mean, yes, of course, it's a massive deal if, you go out there and you lose your life, unfortunately, but I feel like there's something about adventure that makes it so rare and so special that I really feel like we should have a little bit more empathy for the people that actually go out and do these things. Rather than calling them stupid and foolish and underprepared, rather than saying that they've paid for their own funeral and for their own death, I feel like we should maybe take a step back and consider that they've just done something that was probably one of their biggest dreams ever. And yes, unfortunately, they risked their life and some of them maybe perished, but in a way, what a wonderful thing to be able to make your dreams come true, and especially at that level.